What's up, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Goal Line Dynasty. Today, Tyler and I are going to be picking up where we left off, and we're going to get into our top 25 wide receivers ahead of the 2024 offseason for Dynasty purposes. However, before we get into the video, Tyler, how we doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm battling an allergic reaction on my hands, but we are going to power through like Michael Jordan in the flu game, and we are going to get through this rankings video.
So this is going to be your flu game episode. All right, I'm expecting big things then. All right, well, we'll just dive right on into it. I know it's been a couple of weeks since we were last here with our running back video. Apologize, life happens. We had to take a couple weeks off there, but we are back and obviously better than ever. So let's just jump right on into it. Tyler, we got our first tier here, and it's a tier of 4. For a lot of people, it might only be a tier of 3, but you and I were talking before this video started, and we both kind of agree that Amon-Ra deserves to be in the top tier. So from first to fourth in our consensus, we have Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So the one thing I notice here, I have Jefferson at number 1, you have Jefferson at number 2. But I noticed you prefer CeeDee Lamb. So you have CeeDee Lamb at 1. I actually have CeeDee Lamb all the way down at 3. Personally, I'm not going to really badmouth anyone if they have this tier in any sort of order. I think it's perfectly fine. But give me your thoughts on having CeeDee Lamb at number 1 overall ahead of Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, it genuinely does not matter what order you have these guys. I think most of the community is kind of on the same page that if you add anything to any of these guys, then you could move around the tier however you wanted to. But for me, I'm very concerned about Justin Jefferson's not having Kirk Cousins anymore. I'm not one who's going to say, oh, he's going to have Sam Darnold throwing him the football, but he is going to have a rookie quarterback most likely throwing him the football, whether it's JJ McCarthy or whether they move up to get somebody else. We don't know what that quarterback situation is going to look like, but we know it's not going to be the most fantasy efficient quarterback in the entire league. So I was honestly tempted to have him down at number 3 or possibly even number 4. It might sound crazy, but like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, none of those guys' situations have changed whatsoever. They have a stable situation as they come. Dak Prescott's not going anywhere. Joe Burrow definitely not going anywhere. And I don't think Jared Goff's going to be going anywhere anytime soon either. So just the stability of those guys, I think I wouldn't argue with someone who said Justin Jefferson was their wide receiver 4. I think that all 3 of those guys above, or the other 3 guys in the tier, just offer that stability and that long-term security that you know what you're going to be getting. And I am nervous as someone who owns Justin Jefferson in a lot of spots because I have paid for him to be that wide receiver 1 and finish in the top 5 year in and year out. And I might be looking at a guy that's a little bit more replaceable that finishes down more near wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 12, guys that aren't as big of a difference maker. I think that could be a real possibility that Justin Jefferson becomes someone who is not a massive difference maker. He becomes someone who's more so like A.J. Brown rather than a Tyreek Hill type scorer, So I think that's just kind of where my thinking's at. CeeDee Lamb just showed us, obviously finished as the wide receiver 1 on the year. I don't think there's any debate. They're the same age. So like we said, you can move up and down the tier, and I'm not going to argue back and forth on it, but it really does come down to that quarterback situation for me.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with you because normally it's like if you offered me a 1-for-1, I'm going to use Amon-Ra St. Brown as an example. If I have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and this time even 2 months ago, you offered me Amon-Ra in a 1-for-1 straight up trade for Justin Jefferson, I'd be getting Justin Jefferson back. I'd be trading away Amon-Ra. I would have taken that in a heartbeat. However, nowadays, if I'm the Amon-Ra owner and somebody offers me Justin Jefferson, as of this moment in time, I'm hesitant. I'm probably not taking that. I probably am going to just stick with Amon-Ra. That's why it's a tier, right? Because you can kind of interchange it any which way. And even though in a startup situation, I probably still am taking Justin Jefferson number 1 overall, I am a bit hesitant on that, admittedly. So I don't really fault you for the concerns with Justin Jefferson. I don't fault you for really liking CeeDee Lamb as well. CeeDee Lamb is number 3 for me. Just behind Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. But again, it's really just any way you swing it. I don't mind having CD, getting balls from Dak Prescott. Same thing, Jamar Chase gets Joe Burrow. Don't you laugh at me. Amon-Ra gets it from Jared Goff. It's just a really weird quarterback situation over there with the Vikings. And the one thing that we really haven't mentioned, right, is Minnesota. Not only do they have quarterback controversy, but it's crowded now, right? Like they brought in Aaron Jones, they have TJ Hawkinson, they have Jordan Addison. So are we really going to find a quarterback that can evenly distribute to four potentially really good fantasy options, right? You look at Dallas, CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson are really the only ones there at this moment in time. Jamar Chase might be the only one in Cincinnati because they're talking about trading away T. Higgins. Amon-Ra, there's no one he's sharing that offense with besides Sam Laporta. So I think I've kind of talked myself into, just in the span of these last 3 minutes here, maybe moving Justin Jefferson down to that 2 or 3 spot, maybe even the 4 spot in my rankings, just because there's just a lot to unpack.
Yeah, I mean, we over the last 2 years, we've really seen what happens to wide receivers that might be wonderful talents. Like a lot of people think that Garrett Wilson, Drake London might be at like a similar talent level to guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb. But when they don't have a quarterback that can throw them the football, it turns into a really, really bad situation. So even if Justin Jefferson is head and shoulders above those guys, I think this is still going to put a hit on his production. So I wouldn't blame anybody for having him at the bottom of that tier, but in the market value, like I'm not going to add anything to Justin Jefferson to get somebody else. Like I'm going to wait for any of those other 5 owners to come to me with a plus, and then I'll move him,
Yeah. So we can talk about tier 1 all we want, but I think a lot of people talk about tier 1. So let's move into tier 2. This is a smaller tier, only 2 players, 2 extremely young players, one proven at the next level, one very proven collegiate athlete, but has not actually been drafted yet. So now Puka Nacua is your number 5. Marvin Harrison Jr. is my number 5. Conversely, Marv is your 6. Puka is my 6. So these guys are basically tied. Technically consensus 5.5, but I did put Puka at 5 and Marv at 6 for the sake of our consensus, just because Puka has done it. Personally, like I said, I do have Marvin Harrison Jr. one spot above Puka Nacua, but it is a tier for me. If I have the 101 in a 1 quarterback league, obviously that's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. at this point. If I get offered a 1-for-1 for anyone in that tier 1, I'm probably going to take it without much hesitation. When it comes to taking Puka Nacua over Marvin Harrison Jr., though, I know he's coming off of record-breaking rookie year, but I'm still just like, I'm obviously bought in because I have him at number 6 overall. But the prospect of Marvin Harrison potentially going, or he really should almost definitely be going, top 5 in the NFL draft. He's going to go somewhere, the perfect situation. Hopefully goes to Kyler Murray or Justin Herbert, gets to be, the undisputed wide receiver 1 on either of those teams. I'm buying the hype. I think he's going to be really, really good. He's got the draft capital to boot. The only thing that really concerns me about Puka Nacua and why I'm taking an undrafted player over Puka Nacua is it just seemed like the perfect situation. And I don't want to take anything away from Puka Nacua because he was absolutely amazing, and you don't luck into breaking a rookie record, right? Like he's good, he's great, he's here to stay. The thing that makes me worried about Puka, at least slightly worried about Puka, is Cooper Kupp was hobbled all year last year. I am personally not super high on Cooper Kupp. We're not going to be talking about him. He's not in our top 25, so he's not going to show up in this video here. But Cooper Kupp was hindered last year. Tyler Higbee ended up missing some time. More importantly, Matt Stafford, right? Matt Stafford was healthy last year. He leaned on Puka Nacua. But Matt Stafford's not going to be around much longer. He was contemplating retirement as early as this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he retires before Puka Nacua's rookie contract is even up. And Matt Stafford, no matter how you might feel about Matt Stafford, he always produces a top-notch fantasy option. Granted, you look back and yeah, he had Calvin Johnson, might have been a little bit of a cheat code, but he made Kenny Golladay look phenomenal for like 2 or 3 years there. Then he goes to the Rams. Not that Cooper Kupp was a slouch before Matt Stafford got there, but Cooper Kupp really put it together when Matt Stafford got there, right? So I don't know. Is it the Matt Stafford effect? Is Puka Nacua that good? I don't know, but it's weird. Like, what's your what's your rationale for having Puka over Marv? Is it just because he has done it? We've seen him do it. We know. Is it a slight against Marv? What are your thoughts on it?
Definitely not a slight against Marv. I think that it's like a compliment to have a rookie wide receiver, up as my wide receiver 6. I think, like you said, it's just the fact that he's done it. I'm not really worried about Matt Stafford right at this moment. I mean, he's under contract through at least 2025. They had potential out in 2026, where they'd be left with $18.5 million in dead cap. So I could imagine that the Rams at age 38, they're probably going to still hang and hold Matt Stafford around for that. I just think we don't know where Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be playing. He could end up playing for New England. Nobody's going to like that. I believe in Marvin Harrison Jr. Puka's done it. Matt Stafford's going to be there for a while. I think Puka showed last year that he was the top dog over Cooper Kupp. By the time the end of the year came, there wasn't many people who were really questioning, is Puka going to still be getting these targets? It was really what's going to happen to Cooper Kupp now. Cooper Kupp has hit that age cliff and can be up for retirement any minute now. I'm not worried about that long term. So Puka's got Matt Stafford for another 2 years. We don't know. It's also don't get me wrong. With Marvin Harrison Jr., he has to do less to hold his value next year than Puka Nacua does. If Puka comes out, so Puka averaged 17.5 points per game this year. If he comes out and averages 14 or 15 next year, people are going to be down on him. People are going to have a lot of questions and say, what's going on here? He is not the wide receiver 5 or the wide receiver 6 that we thought. He's more so down near that wide receiver 12 range. If Marvin Harrison Jr. comes out and puts up 14, 15 points a game, people are going to go friggin' nuts. He's going to be the wide receiver 3 or 4. Probably even 1 or 2. It's not going to take a lot for Marvin Harrison Jr. to really jump into that top 3 range, because next year, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, these guys are going to be 24, 25 years old. People are going to look at Sleeper, and they're going to see Marvin Harrison Jr. 21, 22, and he's got 3-4 years of age on these guys, and they're going to be willing to start putting him in the same tier and slotting him above if he can come out and even produce at a serviceable in a serviceable way in his rookie year. If he even puts up Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson numbers in his first year, then he's going to be up in that top tier. So it goes back either way. I know I just rambled on a lot, but in terms of me trying to win fantasy football games, I'm just going to hold on to Puka Nacua.
No, and that's a fair take, and I'm glad you brought it up. I believe you had actually texted me a couple weeks ago, and you pointed that out to me as well, where it's Marvin Harrison can go out and put, potentially 3 or 4 less points per game than Puka in 2024. But if that happens and they are that close in points, chances are Marvin Harrison is going to shoot up. And I mean, best case scenario, Puka Nacua is probably just going to stay put, right? We kind of brought it up with Amon-Ra, where he hasn't. He finally has shaken the whole draft capital thing. Puka Nacua is going to follow the same suit, right? We're going to need to see multiple years of an elite level producer with Puka Nacua in order for him to keep that top 5, top 6 dynasty tag that he currently has. So he'll definitely be an interesting name to watch. I mean, I'm rooting for Puka Nacua. I think hopefully everyone should be rooting for Puka Nacua because he's been definitely a fun addition to the NFL. But either way, whether you have Puka or Marvin Harrison, you really can't go wrong either way. So obviously we kind of value Puka Nacua in a 1-for-1 trade. I'd probably say 102 I would need in Superflex and 101 in one quarterback because of that tier in Marvin Harrison. So really good asset and really good find in those 4th round picks that people took with him last year. But moving into tier 3. So this is where things really start to differ for us because anyone can talk about the top 5, top 6 guys here. Tier 3, there is really only one guy that we are really similar on, and it's Malik Neighbors. You have him at number 7. I have him at number 8. We're both big Malik Neighbors guys here at Goal Line Dynasty. However, our next 3 guys in order is A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, and Drake London. You are way higher on those last 2 guys than I am, and I'm 3 spots higher on A.J. Brown. So I've got A.J. Brown at 7, you at 10. Let's talk about Neighbors and A.J. Brown really quick here. In my opinion, getting Malik Neighbors is kind of like resetting the clock on A.J. Brown. Honestly, I can see a very similar production profile for Malik Neighbors at the next level. I do think Malik Neighbors is going to break out earlier than A.J. Brown did. Obviously, we didn't really see a massive fantasy output from AJ Brown for 2 or 3 years. I think we can see it as early as year one from Malik Neighbors. But take me through why you have Malik Neighbors. I don't want to say considerably higher, but you have him at 7. You have AJ Brown all the way at number 10. Is this purely an age thing? Is it the fact that we have likely seen AJ Brown's ceiling and he's probably more comfortably in that 8 to 10 range? What's the big knock on AJ Brown versus Malik Neighbors here for you?
Yeah, I mean it's clearly close, 7 to 10. But the fact is that Malik Neighbors is going to be an ascending asset, whereas AJ Brown's going to be a descending asset going forward. One of the first things that pops up on Sleeper, like we talked about it, before with the Marvin Harrison versus Puka Nacua thing. Like one of the first things that pops up on Sleeper when people click on a player is their age. And AJ Brown's going to get up there. So I think when people see Malik Neighbors drafted top 5, top 6, top 7 to a placement in elite quarterback, like this is a really interesting year because we have these elite talent receivers and these quarterbacks that we know can produce fantasy relevant receivers have high draft picks. So like they're going to get matched up with really good quarterbacks, which is something we usually don't see with really good receivers. Usually they go to bad teams. So I think that just the career trajectory from now in the next 3 or 4 years from Malik Neighbors versus AJ Brown, like I don't think that AJ Brown necessarily retires an Eagle. Like there's a world where he finishes out his contract, he goes to free agency again, whatever they trade him, whatever happens, and I don't even necessarily love that Philadelphia offense for him. It's crowded. Jalen Hurts runs the ball a lot. It's hit or miss between him and Devonta Smith. Like there's a lot of things. There's a lot of question marks that I have about AJ Brown. I don't feel great owning him. And I feel like the leash is shorter for him at this point in his career than it will be for Malik Neighbors. So I would say that's probably why. At this point in the year, on April 1st, when we're recording this, that's probably the asset that I want to own. If it comes down to week 6 of the season, week 7, it might be a different story. But right now, that's the one that I feel more comfortable with on my roster.
Yeah, and even though I personally have AJ Brown one spot above Malik Neighbors, it really just depends on my roster construction. If I'm going to be a top 3 team this year, guaranteed by having AJ Brown on my team, then yeah, that's the situation where I'm going to take AJ Brown. But if I'm middling or definitely in a rebuild, I would 100% take Malik Neighbors over AJ Brown. I mean, these two for me are definitively in a tier, and it just really falls down to team need. Now, before we start talking about Garrett Wilson and Drake London, one scenario I want to run by you. So AJ Brown is obviously going to be an Eagle for 2024. How would it affect your rankings if Malik Neighbors goes number 6 overall to the New York Giants rather than, sneaking in at 4 to Arizona, going to 5 with the Chargers, or even going later on at number 9 or something like that to Chicago, which is also another likely scenario? How down on Neighbors would you be if he landed with the New York Giants and Daniel Jones?
I mean, obviously, I wouldn't be thrilled about it, but it wouldn't necessarily rain on my parade. The Miami Dolphins weren't necessarily great when Jalen Waddle was drafted. The Bengals weren't necessarily wonderful when Jamar Chase was drafted. Same thing goes with Justin Jefferson. A lot of these guys, CeeDee Lamb was drafted behind Amari Cooper. A lot of these guys have been drafted into not great situations, so I'm not going to let it hurt my feelings or anything like that. I would say I think the Giants themselves, the front office, has made it pretty clear that they're on their last legs with Daniel Jones, and yeah, I don't think it's going to be out of the realm of possibility that they're going to be picking near the top of the draft again next year, and they're going to have maybe a quarterback at their disposal or something like that, maybe free agency. There's a lot of things that can happen. We've seen guys like Gardner Minshew come in and turn, Michael Pittman into a top 15 guy, keep him there and keep him at that production level. We've seen, Aiden O'Connell came in and helped Devontae Adams, stay afloat and things like that. So it doesn't take a ton of talent to have these elite at the quarterback position. It doesn't take a ton of talent to let these elite receivers be elite in terms of fantasy ceilings. So I'll take Malik Neighbors, and we have to remember it's Dynasty. You do have the option to hold these guys for their entire careers. I know it never really happens. There's never a time where an asset is going to stay on your roster for the duration of their entire, from their rookie year to the time that they retire. It just almost never happens. but that can happen if you so choose. So I'll take Malik Neighbors and just see what happens with him.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I mean, we'll talk about Romo Dunze in a little bit. 'Cause spoiler, he's in the next tier. But even if Romo Dunze happened to go to the Chargers and Malik Neighbors went to the Giants, I'm still taking Malik Neighbors over Romo Dunze. Like, that's how good Malik Neighbors is. I'm not going to put too much stock either in that year one situation. Maybe if I have a really high draft pick and I'm like really trying to contend and Romo Dunze is going to slot in immediately as Justin Herbert's number one option, maybe that's when I would consider it. But like 9 out of 10 scenarios, I'm still taking Malik Neighbors over Romo Dunze. But the other two guys in this tier, I'm going to let you do most of the talking on these guys because I personally have not one, not two, not three. I have 4 guys in the next tier that I have actually ranked above Garrett Wilson and Drake London in my own personal ranking. So I'll let you talk about these guys really quick, and then I'll get into my spiel. So you've got Garrett Wilson at number 8, Drake London at number 9. Enlighten me.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of like where you have to have these guys that have shown all the peripherals from, target share to, yards per route run to all of these things that we look at in the offseason that try to be predictive about where these great receivers are going to finish during the season. Hopefully, both of these guys stay healthy. Both of these guys have, aging quarterbacks that are coming off of Achilles tears. So I think that they've shown the peripherals. They've shown, that they are good football players. It's time to see it for fantasy, though. I just moved Drake London in a deal for, Tyreek Hill, where I got 2 other upgrades. It's tough to get these guys off of my hands because they do have that name value. And it feels like this is the moment that we've been waiting for so long. And it's like you don't want to sell them right now in April when the next time we're going to set our lineups is not too far away, and you might be able to, bear the fruit of your patience. But if someone's willing to pay me a ton, if someone's willing to give me any of the receivers in any of the 2 tiers below them, like we can go all the way down to, Tank Dell in a first, Zay Flowers in a first, T Higgins in a first. Like that is good deals for me when it comes to, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, even, Malik Neighbors, AJ Brown, any of these guys. So I think that really shows how much talent there is at the wide receiver position. But I think these are these 2 guys, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, are the 2 that I could easily see them moving up into the top 5 if they have productive years in terms of dynasty value. Like I don't see anybody from Ayuk, Tyreek Pittman, anybody going down the list, Rashee Rice, Jalen Waddle. None of those guys really have the ceiling that they can be a top 5 dynasty positional asset. Garrett Wilson and Drake London, I could see either of those guys jumping into that tier with Chase, Amon-Ra, Lamb, and Jefferson, Puka, Marv. I could easily see them jumping into that. I don't see it with anybody else on the list below them. So I think that's why the tier break is right here.
I just can't get behind it with these guys. I don't really have a lot of shares of Garrett Wilson or Drake London because, I mean, with Drake London, I sold too early because now, me being someone who's not super high on Drake London, this would be a really phenomenal time to sell. I did sell Garrett Wilson in a lot of places last year after the addition of Aaron Rodgers, which I still don't really regret, to be honest with you. I'll start by looking at Garrett Wilson. So with Garrett Wilson, for me, he's not a big dude. I mean, he's 6 foot, but he's a skinny guy, right? He's not ever going to be a guy that's catching, 8+ touchdowns, in my opinion. He's going to be a guy that is going to need a very high target volume, which he's had, right? 147 targets as a rookie, 168 targets last year. Not that there's anyone else to throw to in New York, but he's going to need a really high target share. He's going to need, 11, 12, 13. I would say he would need about 1,400 plus yards in order for him to return what people want him to be. And he's still going to have to hit his ceiling of, 6 or 7 touchdowns just to even sniff moving up into the top 5, top 6 wide receivers, kind of like you were mentioning. I know that the Jets have had god awful quarterback play, and I get that, but they're not the only ones, right? Like, I don't know. You look at Minnesota this year. Justin Jefferson goes down. Kirk Cousins goes down. They bring in what's his face, Josh Dobbs, right? That's his name, I think. Jordan Addison was.
You think? Put some respect on that dude's name. He had a
What?
great freaking year. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. He had a good year, and then he fizzled out of nowhere. Flash in the pan. Like guys like Jordan Addison, and I'm not saying Jordan Addison's better than Garrett Wilson. I still prefer Garrett Wilson over Jordan Addison, but this is just kind of the point that I'm making. You can take bad quarterbacks, right? Yes, Josh Dobbs is a bad quarterback. Sorry, but you can take bad quarterbacks, and receivers are still going to produce. Like, I'm sorry, but if you give like there's a solid 15 or 20 other receivers that I don't care who the quarterback is. If they're getting 168 targets, they're going to outproduce what Garrett Wilson did with the Jets last year. Like, we've seen him have this big target count. I know we want to see him with a more accurate quarterback. We want to see him in a higher caliber offense, especially one led by Aaron Rodgers. But man, I just don't see it. He is kind of what I explained Chris Olave to be. This time last year, you and I were having conversations back and forth on why I was so low on Chris Olave. I think he was like 7 or 8 in the consensus, and I routinely had him down at 15 or 16. And the reason why is not because he's a bad football player. It's not because he's in a bad situation. It's because there's a very limited ceiling. He's just not a guy that's going to see a ton of touchdowns, and we're going to need to see over 100 catches, over 13 or 1,400 yards. Like, this guy is going to need to play out of his freaking mind to return what he wants, what dynasty players want him to be. So in my opinion, Garrett Wilson is being put on a pedestal that's entirely too high, right? And the only argument that people ever give me is, oh, well, Zach Wilson has been his quarterback. Okay, well, we've seen receivers and other players perform with bad quarterback play. So I personally, to have Garrett Wilson ranked in my top 10, I need to have seen more over these first 2 years. Then I get into Drake London. Drake London, I was not nearly as high on him as anyone in the draft process. I was shocked to see how high he went, and even more shocked to see the malpractice that Atlanta has done with him in the offense. Now, this is what I will say. Unlike Garrett Wilson, I do acknowledge that Drake London's situation overnight has gotten marginally better, right? They got rid of Art Smith, who was a terrible, awful offensive play caller. They got rid of Desmond Ridder, who was a terrible quarterback. They're bringing in Kirk Cousins, which is one of fantasy's most friendly quarterbacks of all time for the receiver position, which is good for Drake London. I do think he will, have a good year. But let's not pretend like he's been this world breaker, right? Like, he has had really good moments, and he's flashed a lot in the NFL, and he flashed a lot back in USC. But he's only missed one game over the last 2 years, finished PPR wide receiver 31 as a rookie, PPR wide receiver 37 last year. Now, granted, again, the situation's gotten so much better. There's going to be an additional 1,500 yards to go around just because Kirk Cousins is going to be throwing the ball. But there's also Darnell Mooney there. There's also Rondell Moore there. We should finally see the emergence of Kyle Pitts. Bijan Robinson is going to be on the field a bit more. Like, I think people need to temper their expectations with Drake London a bit. Like, saying that he can this time next year potentially be inching his way up to that Jefferson tier, I think that's entirely too much. Now, he's got the frame to go out and get 8 to 10, maybe even more touchdowns for sure, but we've only seen 6 from him so far, right? Like, he's going to need to have a world-breaking year to justify his current cost. If he goes out there and even has 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns, there's no way anyone's justifying him being, a top 8, top 9 dynasty wide receiver this year. If you can't tell, I'm a little passionate on these two guys and why I'm against them. But it's all speculation with these guys. And I know they're 22 and 23 years old, but I would have liked to seen more from them at this point in their careers. And I don't know, man. I don't know. Like, I'm probably not going to re-roll and go to like Romo Dunze over either of these two guys, but I would 1,000% easily take Marvin Harrison, take Malik Neighbors. It would take me, let's say in a super flex startup draft, I wouldn't consider Garrett Wilson or Drake London in this, like if they were in this year's draft cycle, knowing what we know right now, earliest I would take either of them in super flex startup, maybe 107. Like, it's just, I can't get on board with how high people have these guys.
Yeah, and I have some of the advanced metrics pulled up here, and the reality is that the situation is worse for Garrett Wilson, or it was worse for Garrett Wilson than it had been for Drake London. Garrett Wilson's catchable target rate was 67.8% on 114 targets, and that was 65th in the league. That's really, really bad. His average depth of target as well was 10.2 yards. Also 61st in the entire league. Meanwhile, his efficiency, was better than you would expect. Juke rate was, number 4 in the league, dominated rating number 22. His win rate, versus man was, top 30 in the league, or sorry, top 20 in the league. Win rate versus whatever. I could go into all these metrics and things like that about how terrible the quarterback play was, and how they did a lot with very little. I agree with you that it is a lot of speculation, which is, one of the reasons why I moved Drake London for, Tyreek Hill. Like I mentioned, that you are relying on a lot of hopium with these two guys, but I think that they're worth stashing. Like you are excited to own them because they're supposed to be going into great situations, and we've seen these quarterbacks, produce really good receivers before that didn't have to be 100% too talented. So I like Drake London. I like Garrett Wilson. I think this is probably fair. I don't want to sell them for just an aging vet that I know is going to get me, 15, 16 points per game, because that's not all that different from the 13, 14 that they'll put up even if they disappoint. So I'm gonna hold them and hold the upside.
The only rebuttal I will say before we move into the next tier, and if you have something else to say, feel free. I don't want to interrupt you in the middle of it, but I do want to move into the next tier. The only thing that I want to combat on the Garrett Wilson catchable percentage, yeah, it sucks, but he still had the 12th most catchable targets in the entire league last year. I mean, granted, he had, what was it, like 1,100 yards or something? He had 1,042 yards and only 3 touchdowns, and I get it. Zach Wilson sucks. It's a very predictable offense because there was no one else to throw to. But the fact of the matter is there's only 11 receivers in the entire league that had more catchable balls thrown his way than Garrett Wilson. You're a child. Anyway, let's move into tier 3. Tier 3, or tier 4, I should say. This is a big one. We've got 6 different names on here. And again, lots of varying names, but there's really only 2 guys that we have massive differences in. And I'll save those 2 for the end of the tier, because this is wide receivers 11 through 16. And ironically enough, it's our 15 and 16. So we'll save those 2 for the last. So Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Pittman, Romo Dunze. Let's talk about these guys first. Now, Tyreek Hill, I don't think we need to get too much into. We know what he is. We know he's a cheat code at the wide receiver position, but he's getting up there in age. He's already announced that he's going to retire, I think, by the end of the 2025 season, right? Like he has said that. There's quotes of him saying that. So you're taking Tyreek for 2 years here, right? Now, granted, it's going to be a pretty fun 2 years, but you do have to know that the very likely possibility of him retiring is looming. Now, with that being said, I still have him at wide receiver 9. You have him at wide receiver 13. Again, I don't want to get too much into Tyreek Hill because I don't really think there's anything that we can say that people don't know, besides, just announcing that pending retirement fact. But wide receiver 12 in our consensus. My 10, your 14, Brandon Ayuk. So, Tyler, I want to ask you this because anyone who has been following us since we started this channel last year knows that I was hammering the table on Brandon Ayuk nonstop last year, and it seemed to work out. He had over 1,300 yards this year. He was phenomenal. But there's pending turmoil, right, in San Francisco, or there is turmoil in San Francisco, I should say. So, Tyler, I want to give you 2 scenarios. The first one being, you have Ayuk at number 14. Actually, let me just ask you this. Is his potential change in situation affecting his ranking at all, or are you just pretty comfortable with him as a player being there at wide receiver 14?
I'm pretty comfortable with where he's at. I don't think there's going to be any real shakeup to his value, no matter, like, 'cause I don't think that it's a wonderful situation in San Francisco. Like, it's a hit or miss type thing there, anyways, between him and Debo and even George Kittle with the competition there. So. I don't think that there's many like upgraded situations for him. I don't think there's many like really downgraded situations. He's in a crowded offense. It's not like a gunslinging offense, and it's boom or bust. Just take your pick flavor of the week for anybody in that offense right now. So I wouldn't even hate to see him find a new spot. I think he's pretty stable where he's at, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the impressive thing about Brandon Ayuk, though, is he's got back-to-back seasons of only 75 and 78 catches. Not that that's a small amount of catches, but he has, let's just take last year, for example, only 105 targets. As we know, it's good to have over 100 targets, but in the terms of, the elite receivers in the league, 105 targets is really not a lot. But he had 75 catches. He turned 75 catches into 1,342 yards and 7 touchdowns. And the year before that, he had 8 touchdowns and still had over 1,000 yards. So, in my opinion, I mean, dude, he's entering his prime, right? He's 26 years old. He is 6 foot, over 200 pounds. He's a very prototypical, alpha receiver build. And I think if he stays in San Francisco, now, like I said, I have him at wide receiver 10. Staying in San Francisco, I think that's good for me. I'd keep him at wide receiver 10, maybe move him down to 11 or 12. But part of my ranking in him is kind of hoping that a team is going to make maybe a draft day trade for him or something like that. Because if he gets traded for the price that San Francisco is going to ask for him, he's going to go and be an alpha wide receiver somewhere. We would finally see, 125, 135 plus targets for Brandon Ayuk almost no matter where he gets traded to. So, in my opinion, being at San Francisco right now might even be a floor possibility. And we kind of saw how that went last year. So, I like Brandon Ayuk a lot. Michael Pittman, we'll talk about him really quick. My 12, your 15. We've both been pretty high on Michael Pittman for a long time. I would almost argue wide receiver, you having him at wide receiver 15. That's probably about consensus. Off the top of my head, I don't know where he's at on Keep Trade Cut, but that sounds about right. I'm going to bring up Michael Pittman again a little bit later as we talk about this tier, so I'm going to skip over him for now. But Rome Odunze, what are your hopes for Rome Odunze? Is he like, in my opinion, he's very clearly behind Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors, but he's also very clearly ahead of guys like Brian Thomas, A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy. Like, I think Rome Odunze is like the definitive wide receiver 3 of this class. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I don't think the gap is really a ton. I think that obviously a lot can change a month from now if Rome Odunze gets drafted with higher draft capital than Malik Neighbors. We're all assuming right now that it's going to be Malik over him. I think Marv is pretty locked in. You see those Vegas odds, and they're pretty strong, saying that Marv is going to be the wide receiver 1 off of the board. But when it comes to I don't think the gap between Marv and Neighbors is a ton, based on my rankings, obviously based off your rankings. I don't think that the gap between Odunze and Neighbors is really a massive gap. I would take very little to move between the two. I think that they're both elite prospects. I think that Neighbors is more fun, but I think that Rome Odunze is a more fun name to say. But yeah, I mean, my hopes for him are obviously that he gets drafted in the top 10. Granted, I feel really, really weird about putting these guys all so high because we had the same hopes for last year's draft class where we had or maybe not we, but I know I did have, JSN as my wide receiver 9, and I had, Quentin Johnson, Jordan Addison in there as 14 and 15 and things like that. And then, because we all thought that they were going to get top 10 draft capital, top 15 draft capital, and then none of them did. So I get nervous about having these guys this high and valuing these rookie picks this way, this close to the draft, when we can just wait it out and really and confirm that these things are going to happen. But yeah, I don't have a problem moving a guy like Pittman or Ayuk because I think that guys like Pittman or Ayuk, while you feel great about owning them and slotting them into your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 spot every week, and you're going to get 14, 15 points, whatever, you feel good about it. That kind of production is very replaceable. As you can see, you don't feel much worse about slotting in Zay Flowers or T. Higgins than you do Ayuk or Pittman, really. So I think that there's a ton of guys that could replace those guys, and I'll just take my swing on Odunze over those names because he could be the next Justin Jefferson. We don't know. So that's really where I'm at on him. That's why I'll always really kind of prefer the rookies in these tiers. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I hope he gets top 10 draft capital, and if he doesn't, then we're gonna view him differently.
Yeah, and that's why I have Odunze personally at my wide receiver 15 spot. Not that you having him at 12 is egregious to me. I think that's perfectly fine. But to your point, going back to last year, I think I had Jordan Addison at 10 or 11. I had JSN at 12 or 13. I had QJ probably at 15 or 16, kind of similar to where I have Rome Odunze. We all do get ahead of ourselves. We all think we know a lot. And I mean, we know to an extent, right? Like, I don't think anyone really could have predicted just how terrible Quentin Johnston was going to be in year one. We knew he was going to be a project. I still have some sort of faith in QJ because, again, we knew he was going to be a project. I just didn't think he was going to be that terrible in year one, but it is what it is. But yeah, I really need to see Rome Odunze go top 10. At the very least, I'd like to see him go top, 12. But I'm currently, and we'll talk about Brian Thomas Jr. a little bit later on in this video, but I mean, like, I currently am locking Brian Thomas Jr. into like top 16, top 18 capital. So I really want to see Odunze go before that. But we skipped over Michael Pittman, and I skipped over him for a reason, because you have him at number 15, I have him at 12. Big discrepancy in this tier. Our consensus wide receiver 16, DJ Moore. I have him all the way up at 11. You have him all the way down at 20. How do you have Michael Pittman that far ahead of DJ Moore? Like, DJ Moore is more productive. DJ Moore, like, they're a similar size. Like, I honestly think that, personally speaking, everything that Michael Pittman does, DJ Moore does better, in my opinion. And he's about to have a better passing quarterback than Michael Pittman does. I know you've always been like kind of anti DJ Moore, and I was kind of hoping last year would have changed your ideas a little bit, but I see he's still down at wide receiver 20, and admittedly, I'm high on him at wide receiver 11. Like, I think you're closer to the consensus on him than I am. I think he's probably in like that 16 to 18 range, give or take. But what's the rationale? How do you have him all? How do you prefer 19 receivers over DJ Moore right now?
I mean, we are assuming the fact that Caleb Williams is going to come in and automatically be not only a better passer than Justin Fields, but we're also assuming that Keenan Allen's not going to, take a big share of this offense. And then we also have, DeAndre Swift is also in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, right? I got that one right. I know a million running backs moved, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, just double checking before I sounded really stupid and asked you to edit that out. But yeah, I mean, Keenan Allen came to town. We're assuming that Caleb Williams is going to be a more polished passer than Justin Fields was. Year one versus year 3, year 4, whatever Justin Fields was in. It's an iffy situation. Cole Kmet is there. I think it's just a crowded place. I think I'm not in love with DJ Moore. I think he's a really, really good receiver. Again, we're splitting hairs here. Like, if you offered me DJ Moore and a second, or even probably like a third for Michael Pittman, like, there's probably a lot of teams where, like, if I'm looking for an asset, like, I'm gonna take that and like see what I can do with that extra pick. But for me, I think Pittman, he still has that name value, and like I would expect to get something on top if I was going to send him for a DJ Moore. Like, I couldn't imagine myself doing it the other way around. But I think that we kind of just saw DJ Moore's relative ceiling. I was in the same boat as you earlier on in this offseason, but Keenan Allen changes everything. Keenan Allen is a very, very good wide receiver, whether that's for the next year or two or whatever it is. DJ Moore's image has been damaged in my mind, and I think he more falls back into like that wide receiver 15 to 20 range this year in terms of production, just even in terms of redraft, versus that wide receiver 7. Like, I don't think he produces more fantasy wise this year just because Caleb Williams comes to town, because Keenan Allen totally negates that. I think, if anything, I think he probably maybe takes a step back, and some of those other receivers, stay healthy throughout the entire year and finish in the top 10 and push him down the board. So.
Yeah, I mean, bringing up Keenan Allen is definitely a fair argument. However, with that being said, I mean, DJ Moore is going to be in Chicago for a very long time. Keenan Allen is a rental. I mean, his contract expires after 2024, right? I don't see a world where DJ Moore takes a massive step back. Like, yeah, maybe asking him to repeat 1,364 yards and 8 touchdowns, that might be a little aggressive. I think the touchdowns should stay the same. I'd be very surprised if he finished with, if it's less than 8 touchdowns, I'd be surprised to see if it's anywhere less than 7. And then as far as the receiving yards goes, 1,300, that's a lot, right? And adding Keenan Allen to that, it's definitely not a small name. But the Chicago Bears only had 3,400 total passing yards last year, and I would say that's Caleb Williams' floor. I mean, he's supposed to come in and be really, really good. He's coming into a phenomenal situation. People are saying this is by far and away the best situation a number 1 overall pick has walked into in the history of the National Football League, and I don't disagree. Now, I don't necessarily think he's going to go out and break the rookie record, which I think is about 4,200 passing yards or so. I know there's like 3 or 4 quarterbacks that have thrown for over 4,000 yards as a rookie. Cam Newton being one of them. Fun fact for you. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Caleb Williams at least come close to the record. I think, his floor being that 3,400 that Chicago had last year, I can see it going upwards of maybe 37, 38, maybe even 3,900. I won't go out and call a 4,000 yard season, but it could happen in 17 games, right? Fact of the matter is, though, I just think that there's going to be enough to go around. Like, realistically, if DJ Moore puts up 1,250 and 8 touchdowns, right, there's still going to be an additional 2,500 passing yards to go around. Keenan Allen can get his 1,000. Cole Kmet can get his 600 or 700. Whoever else is on that offense is still going to get theirs. Like, I just think there's going to be enough to feed all parties here. So I'm still pretty bullish and pretty high up on DJ Moore. I'll buy him anywhere right now because I'm just so much higher than the consensus, it seems.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like disagree with anything that you said, but like honestly, I'm not even gonna try to argue with what you said. I think I'm just gonna bring up another point really quick. Like as I'm looking at our our spreadsheet here, like I don't know if I agree that there's 3 tiers between wide receiver 12 and wide receiver. I know we're only going into 25 today, but even 26, like if you are scrolling, like you and I are in a decent amount of leagues, right? Like I played in like 14 leagues last year or something like that. I shaved off 2 or 3 this offseason, like trying to focus on the ones that I really care about. I know you play in a lot of leagues. Like, do you feel that much better about seeing like Brandon Ayuk in your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot than you feel about T. Higgins, Zay Flowers? Like, if you see that you have a T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, are you ever really looking to go package something to go get Brandon Ayuk or Chris Olave? Like, I never really feel the need to do that. I feel like, go on.
Brandon Ayuk is a poor example because I'm irrationally high on him, and I have been for a couple years. So in a situation like that, now T. Higgins is also a guy I've been really, really high on, but I finally kind of leveled down to that consensus. Yeah, I would definitely go out and try to trade Zay Flowers or T. Higgins for a guy like Brandon Ayuk, as long as I'm in a contending roster. Like if I'm in a full rebuild, I'm probably not going out and purposely trading for Brandon Ayuk. But with that being said, if I'm in a full rebuild, I'm fine with rostering Brandon Ayuk. Like I'm not going to sell him just to sell him. Where T. Higgins, for example, I might consider because there's always going to be a cult following on T. Higgins, me being one of them for sure. But there's risks involved with T. Higgins at this point in time that you won't see with Brandon Ayuk. There's risks that are involved even with Zay Flowers at this point in time that you wouldn't see with Brandon Ayuk. Now Chris Olave, I'm a bit lower on him. We can kind of segue into our discussion about Chris Olave. You have him pretty close to where you have Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's your 8, Olave's your 11. I have him pretty close to where I have Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's my 14. Chris Olave is my 17. I'm going to say the same thing that I said last offseason. I'm perfectly fine with paying wide receiver, 15 to 17 prices on Chris Olave. I don't know how people are still valuing this guy as a wide receiver 1. I really don't get it. He finally got the QB upgrade, or we thought he was getting a QB upgrade, and then Derek Carr kind of went out there and stunk up the place in New Orleans. But we didn't really see it. I mean, he was wide receiver, I think, 16 off the top of my head in 2023. Perfectly respectable. But it's exactly where I was saying he was going to end up last year. Is he's just a really good wide receiver 2 to have on your roster, and obviously there's a place for that. But I view him in the similar light that I view Garrett Wilson. I need to see more, but there's never going to be that definitive touchdown upside. We're going to need to see high volume, high passing yards, or high receiving yards, I should say, and I would rather chase someone else's ceiling than go for Chris Olave at this point because I think he's just a safe wide receiver too. Is that an asinine thing to say?
I don't know. I mean, I really like Chris Olave. I think he's an excellent wide receiver. I think he's in a good situation. I think we saw that Derek Carr really, once he got healthy last year, like he put up some good numbers, and I'm trying to pull up the second half of the season, the WARP data and things like that to see really where Chris Olave fell. But as I look at his numbers from the second half of the season, I am more than fine rostering Chris Olave, valuing him around a top 15 wide receiver. And I think that his age alone should probably lend him, to the upper part of that tier. As I'm looking at it, let's see. Let's pull up wide receivers warps per game. If you have any other points, you can totally cut me off while I'm pulling this up. But
No.
Olave was he was more than a top 24 receiver if you look at the back half of the year. It's looking like these numbers are all out of whack on this friggin' app, but it looks like he was top 20 if I'm just guessing by my eyes. So I think that his age alone, being 23 years old, having a fully healthy quarterback for the full year, I think all the things that I said about Garrett Wilson, Drake London before, kind of apply to Chris Olave. The peripherals all add up. He can be
And the hopium. And the hopium.
And the hopium all add up. He's got the name value. People are going to, like you said, people are sometimes going to pay you Zay Flowers plus the 201 for Chris Olave. And I'm going to take that every time. Don't get me wrong. But that's just it's so hard to make these rankings. It's so hard once you get to this tier because I think there's just a lot of talent here. But like I said, I don't think there's 3 tiers between wide receiver 12. I think you could split hairs between any of them, and I'll probably say it another 3 times before we end the video.
Yeah, it's just here's my thing. And I will combat the whole second half of the season thing for Chris Olave, right? So if you take away his first half of the season, we can start at week 9. Week 9, he had 16.6 PPR points, followed by 21.4, then a bye week, then 18, then 16. It was good, right? He had a really good stretch of games, and he finished, for the most part, pretty strong as well. But even removing the first half of the season, do you know, relative to other players, where he finished from week 9 to week 18? It was exactly wide receiver 16, which is the exact rank that he held throughout the entire year. And I'm not going to complain about a receiver that's going to average 16.2 points for my fantasy roster. I'm not going to complain about that at all. But the fact of the matter is, he's a perceived top 10, at the very worst for most people, top 12 dynasty wide receiver. I have traded away Chris Olave in every spot that I possibly could, just because of the value that I can get on top to quote unquote tier down to a guy that's going to get me very similar fantasy production that might have a higher ceiling along the way. So I don't know. I've always been a bit weird when it comes to Chris Olave, but until he proves me wrong, I'm just going to keep saying what I've been saying.
Yeah, and I don't blame you because it's very hard to be very elite, and it's hard to get out of this tier of like I'm breaking out of that top 10 to 15 range into I am an elite weapon that I make a difference, that it is going to be tough to replace me. So even though it is difficult to get in that tier, I think he's one of the 3 or 4 guys that can do it. So, but even though Chris Olave is old, he came into the league old too. So that's something that's going to catch up to him sooner than later. But if you want to move into the next tier, I'm good for that too.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's we'll I don't want to necessarily rapid fire these last 2 tiers, but I know the video is getting long at this point, so I do want to go through it a bit quicker here. Less controversy, honestly. I knew in the first 2 tiers we would agree. The 3rd and 4th tier, there's definitely a lot of controversy here. We have some big differences between these 2 tiers, but nothing that I'm necessarily going to go to war with you over for sure. But in this tier, we have 5 receivers in order: Rashee Rice, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Jordan Addison, and Nico Collins. Now, for the purposes of this video, it's April 1st, 2024. The most recent update on Rashee Rice is that he's cooperating with authorities. So I don't want to speak to the legal situation. I know you don't want to speak to the legal situation. Personally, this has not affected my ranking on him from a dynasty standpoint. I don't know what's going to happen legally, but the fact of the matter is, I don't see this necessarily affecting his football career, and I could be completely off base and wrong for saying that. I don't know. I'm not going to defend the actions of what he did for sure, but he's my wide receiver 16 before the incident. He's still my wide receiver 16 after the incident. If you want to take that how you will, take it how you will, but Maybe not the right time to say this, but I think there's a buy low window on Rashi Rice. Anyway, we'll move on from him. Jalen Waddle is our next
you can just
guy.
tell by the look on my face. You can just tell I don't want to say a goddamn word. So.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. Like I said, I don't want to speak to the situation, but whether I think it's fair or not, I think he's still going to be playing in the NFL for the Kansas City Chiefs at some point in 2024, right? I think there's going to be some sort of suspension or legal battles or whatever, but he's going to be catching passes from Pat Mahomes in 2024. I have no doubt about that. But Jalen Waddle, you're 16, my 20. I'll speak to Jalen Waddle a little bit because I am a little bit lower than him, than you. I'm a lot lower than Jalen Waddle on the consensus, and it kind of seems like I think Jalen Waddle is more where you're at with him. I think he's like wide receiver 15, 16, 17 in a lot of consensus rankings. He had a really disappointing 2023. In my opinion, I kind of view, and maybe this is the wrong take, but I kind of view Jalen Waddle in a similar light to how I view or used to view Mike Williams for the Chargers, right? Two completely different players, but boom or bust, right? You put him in your lineup, you're hoping for 25, you might get 6. And that's kind of what to expect with Jalen Waddle nearly week in and week out. He's not a guy I'd be comfortable with having as my wide receiver 1. I'd prefer not to have him as my wide receiver 2. However, if I can get him as my third receiver on my roster, I will pay the price of, that wide receiver 16 to 20. There's nothing wrong with having a boomer bust guy in your lineup, but to anyone still holding on to that, top 12, top 14 dynasty asset in Jalen Waddle, I don't see it personally.
Yeah, and I mean, if he had a fully healthy year last year, I think we might be looking at him in a little bit of a different light. But I'm not in love with Jalen Waddle, obviously. I think if you look in terms of what he did on a per game basis, he was around guys like Devonta Smith, Cooper Kupp. He was similar to Chris Olave, Jaden Reed, Devontae Adams. If you're gonna look for that, he actually, I mean, honestly, he wasn't all that different from a guy like Nico Collins. As I'm looking at it on a per game basis, it says here Nico Collins, 0.13 to 0.12 for terms of warp per game. I know you're still a little iffy on what that means, but it basically means that they were doing similar stuff for your fantasy lineup. Everyone's excited about Nico Collins. No one's excited about Jalen Waddle. I think if he did put up a fully healthy year, we'd be having a little bit of a different conversation. But I don't think that. I think people are more riding on again the hopium that Tyreek Hill is going to be out sooner than later, and he might be serviceable until he's really, really good and irreplaceable in your lineup. If you have held on to Jalen Waddle over these last 2 or 3 years, and you've ridden out the Tyreek Hill train, and you're in the latter half of it, so I think you might as well just wait it out and see how things play out. But I think that's kind of the thing with Jalen Waddle is people are going to be waiting for Tyreek to leave. So I think he's probably priced appropriately. He's not going to be a world breaker for your lineup, but if you get lucky and he has a really good week in week 16, 17, then he might end up being the one to win your league. So,
yeah, the one thing about Jalen Waddle, his best stretch of games came between, by the looks of it, we'll just say week 6 to week 15, right? Because he didn't play very well in week 16. I think he actually got hurt in week 16 because it doesn't look like he played the rest of the season. But to his credit, between week 6 and week 15, when he was on, he was on. Overall, he was the wide receiver 8 in that period of time. And then from a points per game standpoint, he had 16.1, which was good enough for wide receiver 10, right? So, but in that same stretch, if we do count week 16 in here, that was 6 points. Week 13, 10 points. Week 11, 9.5. Week 9, 8.4. He's just, it's not getting 8.5 points from your wide receiver 3 is not going to crush you. Getting 25 points from your wide receiver 3 is going to be awesome. If he's in that wide receiver 2 spot, if he's your number 2 wide receiver on your roster, you might want to explore some options to add, a quote unquote tier down, maybe add some additional depth, something on top of Jalen Waddle, because he's just, he's not the guy I want to really put all of my eggs in the basket for. You know what I mean? Devonta Smith, Jordan Addison, Nico Collins, also in this tier for us. We're both very similar on Devonta Smith and Jordan Addison, both of those being separated by only a few spots. Our big discrepancy is Nico Collins. So I'm surprised. I actually have him 7 spots higher than you do. But it seems like in every mock draft we have done, or anytime we talk about him, you regard Nico Collins a lot higher than I do. I think that speaks less to our value discrepancy and just more to kind of what you were alluding to earlier, to where it's kind of like there might not necessarily be a big difference between the tail end of tier 4 through tier 5 and even tier 6 that we're going to go into in a little bit, right? Like it's just kind of all meshes together, kind of just whoever you prefer. I genuinely thought you were going to be higher on Nico Collins. I was going to ask you your takes on him, so I still want you to give me your takes on him. I'm just a little taken back that I'm like kind of significantly higher on Nico Collins than you are right now.
Yeah, but again, I would like to point out that it's not like totally a significant jump, right? Because if you had told me like, oh hey Tyler, in your recent rankings, you said there was 24 receivers that you'd rather have over Nico Collins, I'd be like, you're probably wrong, but it turns out that there's just really a ton of good receivers in the league. I think Nico Collins has as much upside as anybody, but the floor could also totally fall out on Nico Collins. Like if he comes back down to earth and he finishes as like, wide receiver like 30 next year and like has like an average year instead of exploding like he did this year when, Tank Dell was injured, and you have this rookie phenom that nobody has any tape on, nobody has any film on until later on in the year. And yeah, I'm not discounting what CJ Stroud did or anything like that. I'm not discounting what the offense is, but there's nobody in the world who is going to see if Nico Collins goes, the first 5 games of the year and only puts up like, 40 fantasy points or 50 fantasy points. People are going to be hitting the panic button so hard. Whereas if you see guys, for me, even like Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, like those guys have a little bit more security for me. So even though I think like, the ceiling, Nico Collins has the same ceiling as any of these guys in this tier. He even has the same ceiling as a guy like Garrett Wilson or Drake London. Obviously, we saw Nico Collins finish above those guys this year. So I think he does have, that potential, and I wouldn't argue with anybody having him ranked higher. I'm not going to argue with you having him at 18, but the floor could easily fall out on this guy, and he could all of a sudden be worth, a late second to mid third round pick this time next year if he really, craps the bed. Whereas I think a lot of these other guys are going to have longer leashes than him. So that's really just where the hair split.
No, and that's completely fine. The one thing with Nico Collins too that I don't know if I've heard at a lot of points. I don't know if people are ready to talk about this. He's in the 4th year of his rookie deal, and he was not a first round pick. I mean, I'm imagining he extends with the Houston Texans. I would be really surprised if they don't extend him. But there's a possibility his situation drastically changes this time next year, right? If he bottoms out in 2024, do the Texans re-sign him? Does he even get a really good deal in free agency? Like he'll get picked up, obviously, but is he a highly sought after receiver in the 2024-2025 offseason? We don't know. There's a lot of speculations in Nico Collins, and honestly, I don't necessarily know if I'm comfortable having him all the way up at 18. I think I might be more aligned with you closer to the 25, so I'm going to reassess him a little bit here. But before we move into the next tier, we'll briefly bring up Devonta Smith and Jordan Addison. So Jordan Addison, in my opinion, very risky asset right now. I'm not going to speak too much to him as a player, but I will speak to his situation. As someone who I had Jordan Addison over JSN in my rankings last year, and I don't regret that whatsoever. It seems to be working out pretty well. Of course, we all missed out on Puka Nacua, but it is what it is. Jordan Addison's really good. He's really good, but there's 2 issues right now. One, he is and will probably forever be behind Justin Jefferson, or at least for the next 4 years, be behind Justin Jefferson. Minnesota's not going to let Justin Jefferson walk. I don't care what the rumors are. I don't care how much they'll get in a trade package. Justin Jefferson's not leaving Minnesota. That's just not going to happen. They also don't have a quarterback. What a lot of people are doing right now, they're jumping ship on Jordan Addison. And I think that's the wrong move. There's a lot of dynasty analysts out there that are saying, we got to get rid of Jordan Addison. He's not going to repeat 2023. His value is going to drop off the face of the earth. And I don't disagree in terms of him not repeating 2023. He's not going to have 10 touchdowns in 2024. I don't care what quarterback they bring in. It's not Kirk Cousins, right? Kirk Cousins is one of the few quarterbacks in this entire league that I'd be comfortable with supporting multiple fantasy assets like Justin Jefferson, TJ Hockenson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, you name it. But it's not the time to sell Jordan Addison. I've been shopping him around and just seeing the kind of offers that I could get. I got called crazy for this is a one quarterback league, by the way. I asked for what was it, the 109 or I don't remember what I asked for on top of it. I asked for 109 plus something, and he countered with like I think it was 210 and Christian Kirk, which is just nowhere in the realm of possibilities that I would even consider selling Jordan Addison for at this moment. Other leagues, I've been getting offers of like late firsts, early seconds, some sort of combination of that. It's it's not the time to sell Jordan Addison. If you liked him enough and you invested in him in 2023, hold on to him right now. He's not a buy. He might be a buy actually at his current price, to be honest with you. But more importantly, do not sell him. Just hold him through all the noise. Because he is a really good receiver and he's going to come out on top out of this entire thing. Tyler, I'll let you, if there's anything you want to add on Jordan Addison, feel free to. I kind of just wanted to speak about his situation, but I know you are my residential, Devonta Smith fan club, head there. I know you were massive on him last year. Looks like he moved down your rankings a little bit, but nothing, egregious there. How you feeling about Devonta Smith going into the 2024 season?
Yeah, pretty similarly. I mean, I think like I was screaming for his name. So I thought he was undervalued at the time, and I think I turned out to be right. But I think the value is kind of corrected on him. So I think the situation is probably going to stay the same for him for at least the next year or two, for as long as AJ Brown is there. But I think that he is the more reasonably priced of those two assets, and I mean at cost, like I'd much rather have Devonta Smith than AJ Brown. But yeah, I don't really feel all that much differently. I think he's going to be perennially top 10 to 20 wide receiver, and he's going to finish in that tier pretty comfortably. And I think he does have the upside to have, one or two of those seasons, maybe even three of those seasons where he finishes, top 6, top 7, if he really has a great year and gets put into the right situation. So he's a guy that I'm holding, and I feel like people are, kind of worn out on his name, and he might not be a guy that's got that top 5, top, 3 ceiling. He probably will never get to that point. I think he's more of a support role kind of wide receiver, but he's a very good support role wide receiver. I think he is a much better, Tank Dell, for the Eagles. I think he's a really good route runner. He's, very fast. He's got all of the things that you need to be a great receiver. And I mean, I'm just going to kind of beat the drum. People know that he's very talented. So I'll leave it at that. I don't think he's going to be, perennial wide receiver 1, but I think he's got that relatively high floor of a top 24 wide receiver that is going to give you those spike weeks and those spike years as well, throughout his tenure in the NFL. So I do like Devonta Smith a lot.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Devonta Smith, especially at cost. But dude, like this might be like an outrageous take to say, and I do have Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave ranked above Devonta Smith. I don't understand how people are so insanely higher on Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave than they are on Devonta Smith, because in my opinion, it's like a very similar type of getting fantasy production. Obviously, Garrett Wilson's the wide receiver 1 in his offense. Chris Olave is the wide receiver 1 in his offense. Devonta Smith is just not going to be that as long as AJ Brown is in town. But I really just don't understand the value discrepancies there. So, like, if you want to go out and get Garrett Wilson and you want to go out and get Chris Olave, but you don't want to pay the prices, go out and get Devonta Smith. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be incredibly similar production. But maybe that's an egregious thing to say. I don't know. But let's move into our final tier here. Final tier, wide receiver 22, 23, 24, and 25. We've got Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, and one final rookie in Brian Thomas Jr. So Tank Dell, I'll let you talk about him. I've said it in a couple mock drafts that we've done. I'm not necessarily low on Tank Dell. I still have him in my top 24 Dynasty wide receivers, but I'm not necessarily as high on him as others are. So I'll let you speak to Tank Dell's value there.
Yeah, I mean, Tank Dell, in terms of warp per game, he was a top 5, top 6 wide receiver last year. He was top 5. He was number 5 in the league in terms of what he was doing for your fantasy lineups on a week-to-week basis. He's tied to an elite quarterback. I think that he is one who, again, like he could be what Amon-Ra St. Brown was. He came on early on in the season and got hurt for the second half. But if this guy stays, he's going to stay tied to that elite quarterback. If he continues to produce, I don't know if it's going to be really that long before he ends up getting into that top 10 tier, top 8 tier. I could look it up. I'm pretty sure he was around 16, 17 fantasy points per game last year. Let's look it up really quickly. He was right at 15 points exactly points per game last year. And for a rookie wide receiver, that's something that you jump off the walls for. So I think if he had the draft capital, he'd be ranked a lot higher. But so he's still got a little bit more left to prove. And, he only did it for half the season. But it's not like he played healthy and fell off at the second half of the season like we've seen other wide receivers do. There's a guy who got hurt. I don't think there's going to be many things that stand in the way of Tank Dell repeating next year, if not, improving alongside with CJ Stroud. So I love Tank Dell, and it feels weird to say that he's, my wide receiver 21, but again, there's just a ton of talent. I could see the floor falling out from beneath this guy, but I don't think that's going to happen. That's really strictly based off draft capital. I'm only going to say that about guys that were drafted in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, whatever, of the NFL rookie draft. But that doesn't stop the fact that they are producing and putting up fantasy points. So if he's going to keep up what he did last year, I think that, the sky is the limit for a guy like Tank Dell.
Yeah, so I'll get into Zay Flowers a little bit here. Zay Flowers is an interesting one because he had a really good rookie year. He's tied to Lamar Jackson, which, not the best quarterback to be tied to, but also not the worst. I think Lamar Jackson actually took a pretty good step this year as a passer. I was pretty impressed with that. But this offense could suddenly become a little crowded. Mark Andrews is coming back. Isaiah Likely has proven that he deserves a spot on the field. I really think Baltimore needs to start, using both of these guys on the field at the same time, and I think they realize that too. The big thing, though, and I forgot to bring this up with Chris Olave because I think the Saints could go with a wide receiver in the first round because, they really need one. But the Baltimore Ravens also really need another receiver. They have pick 30, right? It kind of seems like the perfect opportunity to take a wide receiver. It's a late first round pick. Obviously, they used one on Zay Flowers last year, but it's not a bad idea. When you're paying Lamar Jackson as much as you're paying him, it's not a bad idea to take a first round rookie wide receiver that you can give a 5th-year option to and keep nice and cheap for 5 years. Will it actually happen? I don't know. Whenever I do my mock drafts, I do one just about every week. I'd say about half the time I give Baltimore Ravens a wide receiver, but I really wouldn't be surprised if they take one at number 30. And if they do, it does make me worry a bit about Zay Flowers' value because I think he was a direct beneficiary of really not anyone else being available in that offense. Like Mark Andrews went down, Odell Beckham is washed, right? Nelson Aguilar is Nelson Aguilar. Zay Flowers was really the only reliable passing option for a good stint of the season for Lamar Jackson. I think it kind of plays into a lot of things. So I'm not necessarily scared of Zay Flowers, and I'm not super hesitant on him just because they could draft a wide receiver. But I think the expectations around Zay Flowers, if anyone has him higher than this, 22 to 26 range, we might need to temper the expectations because I think he could take us, even if they don't take a wide receiver, with a fully healthy Mark Andrews and that Ravens offense just being that Ravens offense. I wouldn't be surprised if Zay Flowers actually takes a little bit of a step back from his rookie year.
Yeah, and again, Zay Flowers is another guy with a lot of good peripherals. I agree with you. He definitely did benefit from the fact that, Mark Andrews wasn't around for the second half of the year. All of those things, the fact that he was the only real legitimate wide receiver in the offense, but he won. It's on player profile, it says his total route wins were number 6 in the entire league, and his route win rate, 55.9%, was number 6 in the league. So, against whatever. This guy was very, very good in terms of the peripherals and the advanced stats and metrics as a rookie. But at the same time, we've never seen, Lamar Jackson produce a top. I don't even know if we've seen him produce a top 15 fantasy wide receiver in his entire career. You think the best one was Hollywood Brown? I don't think Hollywood Brown has a top 15 finish under his belt. So it would take a lot for Zay Flowers to really get there, even though I think he's very talented. I think they're probably, like you said, going to add something to this room. If it's not going to be someone through the draft, then it might be, you know, a veteran that just takes up an extra 2 or 3, 4 targets a game that just don't go to Zay Flowers, you know. So even though I think he's pretty good, I don't think the situation is ever going to be one that allows him to get into that top 10, top 8, top 5 difference maker range. So I think, you know, while Zay Flowers has a relatively high floor, and I like that about him, it just I don't see a ton to get really thrilled and excited about with Zay Flowers.
Yeah, I like that you pointed it out. The floor seems nice and safe, but the ceiling makes me hesitant on him. Now, with our next two guys, T. Higgins and Brian Thomas Jr., I think these guys both have an incredibly high ceiling, but they both have a very low floor. As we know, T. Higgins has been fighting injuries his entire career. Will we ever see him play a fully healthy season? I don't know. Will we see him catching balls from Joe Burrow in 2024? I don't know. T. Higgins is a polarizing player because he has been valued, especially by me, as a top 10 dynasty wide receiver before. And as you can see, I mean, he's fallen even in my own rankings. He was a top 10, top 12 guy for me this time last year. He's all the way down to 2022, or he's down to wide receiver 22. It might be recency bias. It might be the injuries. It might be the impending team change. I don't know. But T. Higgins is an interesting one. I don't really know what the market is for him because I have T. Higgins in a lot of leagues because I was buying him when I thought the market was too low on him. And I don't really know what the market is on T. Higgins because I'm not selling him for a low end wide receiver 2 price, but I know that's where he's valued. So like Tyler, from the outside looking in, let's say you're in a super flex league. If you have T. Higgins on your roster and I offer you, let's say, pick 111, are you taking that? Are you considering that? What does that look like?
No, because I mean, at this point in the year, I feel like all I'm really looking for is like how long is my leash? You know, like can this player perform poorly and still have some sort of value, some sort of flexibility that I can do with them? Whoever I get at the 111, like if they don't come out firing, it's gonna be tough. Like they're not gonna gain value. Like if you tried to trade Rashee Rice in week 5 last year, you weren't getting anything for him because he hadn't done anything yet. You know, he had been drafted at the back end of the first round, early second. Like you weren't getting anything for Rashee Rice. If you look at a guy like T. Higgins, I think he could come out and put up like 13, 14 points a game next year, and he could still relatively hold his value. I think if you want to get T. Higgins from me, I'm going to have to look at the 108, 109 range. Like, I'm going to have to get a guy who people like know his name right now and are excited about him before the draft. Like Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy who's going to have, you know, some kind of a leash moving forward next year because people like him. You even see there's still like markets for guys like JMO just because they got like a first round draft capital. That's what I'm going to be looking for. It's going to have to be a receiver with first round draft capital that people are going to put some respect on their name. And it's going to, you know, give me an opportunity to move them before they crater in value. So that's kind of just where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point right there is how weird his value is because if I'm buying him as someone who's historically high on T. Higgins, if I'm buying him, the 111 is probably the earliest I'm going to send. But I wouldn't sell him for 111. Like I would want, I think asking for 107 would be a little ridiculous because you have the quarterbacks and the 3 receivers and Brock Bowers. It would take, it probably would take 107. Maybe I'd consider 108 on the off chance that I could expect someone to slip. Because I do think I have Brian Thomas Jr. only a few spots behind T. Higgins. If that's where my pivot is and I'm resetting and I'm having less injury risk, then yeah, by all means. But I think I would need the 108 at minimum to trade T. Higgins. But as someone who is historically high, the most I would trade is 111 right now. So he's weird. He's kind of like Jordan Addison, right? I don't know. It's not necessarily a buy. It's not necessarily a sell. He's just kind of a hold on and pray to God we get some value back in 2024. But we'll wrap up this video by talking about Brian Thomas Jr. In my opinion, he's kind of how I viewed Quentin Johnston last year. They're not the same player. They're not the same player, but I viewed Quentin Johnston as a boomer bust guy that I was fine with taking as the wide receiver 3 of the class last year because of the ceiling, knowing that he's a project, knowing that he could bottom out. I view Brian Thomas Jr. in a very similar light. In one quarterback leagues, I'm going to look his way at 105 or 106. In super flex leagues, I'm looking at his way, 108 to 110 range, depending on landing spot here. I mean, he's an athletic freak, big dude, really fast, but he's not super polished, right? But his ceiling is what keeps him in my personal top 25 wide receivers right now for Dynasty, is because if he hits his ceiling, you're getting a wide receiver one. Now, cautionary tale, I don't think he's going to have an amazing rookie year. I want him to do better than QJ for sure. But like, as long as Brian Thomas can hit, let's call it 750 yards as a rookie, I'll maintain confidence in him.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who just does freaky athletic things. Like when you watch Jaden Daniels highlights, if you're trying to decide between Jaden Daniels and Drake May, I don't think you would necessarily notice that like Malik Neighbors is the more highly touted prospect. Like I think you would see more wow plays out of Brian Thomas. So I think he makes the more athletic and crazy plays. Kind of reminds me of like he does a lot of things that George Pickens does. And George Pickens is a guy that we're seeing gain a lot of steam. People get excited when they see guys do crazy athletic things. So I think Brian Thomas, like you said, if he hits his ceiling, he could be there. If he doesn't, then the floor could totally fall out from under him. But I will say, I mean, Brian Thomas is my wide receiver 28, and I would rather have Brian Thomas Jr. over everyone beyond Christian McCaffrey in my running back ranking. So it's like Kenny Walker down. So my RB9 down. I would rather have my wide receiver 28 over my RB9. So that's basically, I mean, what I'm looking at is there's so much more wide receiver talent than safer wide receiver talent than there is running back talent. Just a point that I kind of wanted to point out. No, it was entirely random with no basis, but we are at least an hour into this video, so I figured I would just throw out my pillow talk thoughts.
Yeah, no, we are an hour and 22 minutes into this video, so, a little bit longer than I had wanted it to be, honestly. If you're still with us, we appreciate you. If you're not here to hear it, so poo on you, whatever. But yeah, I agree. There's 7, maybe 8 running backs that I would take over the potential ceiling that I would get with BTJ. Now, for some reason, BTJ falls out of the first round. I don't think that'll happen. If he falls out of the first round, then we'll reassess. But by all reports, he is like locked and loaded to be the 4th receiver off the board in real life, and probably likely a lot of fantasy drafts out there. But we will see. But anyway, that is our 25 wide receivers. Obviously a bit of a longer video. There's just a lot to talk about with these receivers. A lot more to talk about than the running backs, because by the time you get into that 15 to 25 range of running backs, you're like, oh yeah, maybe they can score a few touchdowns here. Maybe they can do this or do that. The wide receiver talent in the National Football League right now is we are so spoiled with the wide receiver talent in the NFL right now. And when you're in dynasty leagues, obviously your quarterbacks are important in superflex, but whether it's one quarterback or superflex, wide receivers are the anchor of your dynasty roster. And you should 1000% be building around wide receivers in like 95% of the scenarios out there. So I just think it's important to put some context to the wide receivers, kind of go through what we do and what we don't like with these guys. And obviously, our rankings are going to change infinitely between now and kickoff in September. Things are going to change a lot just after the NFL draft weekend, right? A lot of scenarios are going to be changing. Some rookies are going to go higher than we thought. Some rookies are going to go lower. It's going to have this whole domino effect. But either way, man, I'm very excited. It's officially NFL draft month. We've got a lot coming up on the horizon. I imagine we'll get into some rookie talk in the coming weeks. But before we wrap up this video, Tyler, any closing remarks, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, just to back up what you just said, I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at, like, warp charts and, like, where the real edges are in these different formats of leagues. And I think we would probably agree that, like, start 10 is, like, a stock format. And, I mean, these wide receivers, like, they are at the very top, the top 2, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, those guys are above the quarterbacks in their range. But as you move down, like, these wide receivers are neck and neck with these quarterbacks. The wide receiver 7 is really doing just as much for you as the quarterback 7 is in terms of winning your league. And when you get into those, deeper lineup leagues, the start 11, like that line of wide receivers really is more difference making than those quarterbacks. So Even though it goes against what we know and love, and like we're prioritizing these quarterbacks, and they are king. When you have the quarterback one and the quarterback four in your lineup, because they are so consistent and they are putting up those numbers week in and week out, you feel more comfortable about them than the wide receivers, and you want to prioritize that. When it comes to winning these weeks, man, like you want to stock up on these wide receivers. They're going to be the ones that they're gonna win you the week. And they're going to end up, winning your championship. That's what it's all about, is winning the money. So I'll leave it at that. Wide receivers they might end up being the king of fantasy if we look back. If the graphs look the same this time next year, then we're going to be looking at wide receivers like the new quarterbacks, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't disagree with you there. Again, just the importance of wide receivers is almost second to none, right? In any format you're in. But that'll do it for us here on Goal Line Dynasty. If you stuck with us for the entire video, you are an absolute saint, and we appreciate you. If you're only here through bits and pieces, hey, we appreciate you as well. And even if you're not hearing this, but you've been on this video at some point, we appreciate you and every single person who who follows, likes, subscribes, watches anything at all. We appreciate you all. But for myself, for Tyler, for Goal Line Dynasty, we will see you next time.